This is the Barin Nymph.
Address me as Prince Barin.
Okay, all right, the Prince Barin Nymph. It's my take on the Psycho Prince Nymph, or the Prince Nymph, and we're going to tie it up. So grab a cup of chill as we sit back and go on the Vise with the FlyOlderGuy. And on the Vise, we're going to start with a size 14 wet nymph hook. I'm tying these in a 14 or a 16 right now, and pairing that with an appropriately sized bead head. You can go with gold or copper, something nice. The thread we're using is a green unithread, 72 denier. It's a good color for this fly. Really going to bring out that green. I'm going to start the thread right at the hook bend. So right back there, going to get that thread locked in and trim off the tag end nice and close. And I'm starting it right there because we're going to tie in some Goose Biots for a tail, but I want to give it a little bit of a dubbing ball at the bend to keep the separation for the biots. Now, I'm blending my dubbing. I'm blending a Peacock with a little bit of a yellow Antron, a yellow 60 Antron. You want to go about 50-50. If anything, I'd go maybe 60-40 with the 60% yellow just to brighten up that Peacock. It can be a pretty rich green, and the yellow is going to help it stand out a little bit. So like I said, we're making a little dubbing ball to keep the biots separated, the tailing biots. So just a tiny bit of dubbing to start out back here, and right at the bend, just build it up with a few turns. Just a nice little dubbing ball. You can see it there. I'm going to lock it in place with a couple of extra wraps. And then we'll leave the thread right there. And we'll start to get our biots ready for our tail. And I'm using an olive biot here, or 2 olive biots we're going to trim off. It's a very delicate material. It's difficult to work with, so I'm going to try to show you some tricks that I like to use. And I'm going to just a little bit of a pinch on there to hold it in place. And 2 like light wraps, or 3 light wraps, just to get it in place, but still giving me the ability to adjust it a little bit. You see how I adjusted it to get it pointed the way I want. And then a couple more wraps to lock it in, just a bit more, and then I'll pick up the other biot, and we can get it lined up nicely, pinch it, and get that locked in. Again, a couple wraps, 2 or 3, just to get it in place, see how it is, and then you can adjust it slightly, carefully. And once you get it adjusted to where you like it, they look pretty even. Tweaked it there a little bit, but it looks nice and even right about there. So we'll lock it in place with a few more tight wraps. Give it a little bit of an inspection. It's looking pretty good. So I will hold it in place and just lock it in a bit more there before trimming off the tag ends of these Goose Biots. They are, again, a very delicate material. They can be frustrating. Just take your time and be gentle with them, and then you should be okay. And I'm just gonna, tie down those tag ends that I trimmed off. You can build up a little bit of a tapered body, but we're gonna tie in more material to do that. So one of the first materials is this gold wire. This is a small gold wire, and it's gonna help us give the illusion of the segmentation of the body, and it goes all over the place when you trim that off. But we've got it now, and we're going to tie it in right there, right at the tie-in point where those biots got trimmed. And you can give it a couple wraps, pull it back, and then just tie it into place. Nice and tight right there. And that is going to be where we leave our thread to tie in our next material, which is green pheasant tail. And we're going to pull off several pieces of pheasant tail here, and this will represent our casing, and this green is going to work nicely with this pattern. This was a good color. I'm glad I picked this up and transfer it so that I have the tips facing out, and I'm going to tie it in at the tip end, or quite a bit back from the tips, because the tips can be a little brittle and crack easily. So we're tying it in and tying it back, and like I said, we're building up like a natural taper here as we tie in our material, so you don't have to go crazy about building a taper underneath before you apply the dubbing. This taper is kind of taking care of itself as we tie in our materials. So now that we have the pheasant tail tied in nicely, we're just going to trim off the tips, get the bead head out of the way and trim the tips off, and then we will just kind of cover up those trimmed off ends, build up a little bit more of a taper, bring the thread back a touch more, almost to the back, and check on that. Looks good. And we'll get more dubbing. And this is the dubbing blend again of the Peacock and that yellow Antron dubbing. I just blended them by hand. You don't have to go crazy with the grinder. You can do it by hand for this. But you want quite a bit of dubbing for the body. It's a good size noodle. Not too tight, but I definitely tighten it as I go here. So I've applied quite a bit of dubbing to start, at least. And we'll get it started with a couple of turns towards the back and then come back up towards the front. Like I said, tighten it as you go, as you feel you need to, and build up a nice body. Not crazy plump, but you want it to have, again, a good taper to the body. Get that bead head out of the way, and you can see it's getting there. I do want to leave a nice amount of space, at least hook eye behind the bead, but I could definitely use a little bit more dubbing on here. So I'm going to add a little bit more dubbing as I build up this body. So just a bit more dubbing here applied, and you can see I'm leaving space behind that bead head because we have to lock in more material, starting with this pheasant tail. Now it slipped to the one side, so I'm adjusting it more towards me, and my wrap will naturally pull it away. So doing that helps it line up a little straighter, as you can see. And it looks good. That's a nice amount of pheasant tail to have for the casing. So I'm locking it in place, trimming it out nice and close, and covering a little bit, covering the butt ends. But again, we're coming back up with the wire now. So I'll get the bobbin into the cradle. I'm going to use a material clip here. It's just easier. It helps you get more of an even wrap with this wire. And you can see I'm trying to be as even as I can with the spacing of these wraps. It helps. You want it to look as good as you possibly can make it. So 4 good segmented wraps, and then I'll give it a few more wraps right there where I'm going to just tie down that material. So we pull the bobbin off the cradle, and just very carefully, I leave the clip on for the weight and just work the thread around the clip a couple times to get that material locked in, and then you can take the clip off and just trim it out nice and close with the material scissors. I can see I got kind of a loose piece of dubbing on there too, so we might have to take care of that in a second. But lock down your wire and take care of that little loose piece of dubbing. Looking pretty good, looking nice. Segments look good. I'm always preening the tail. I don't know, Goose Biots, they drive me wild. And speaking of wild, we've got the wildly bright green crystal flash that we're going to use to represent like an emerging wing. It's a very attractive looking material. It's shiny, bright green, and I've taken 2 strands and I'm just going to double it over and then double them over again until we've got a nice sized bunch. And take that loop, and that's the loop where we will just tie it in right there. A few good tight wraps, get it locked into place. It's looking good, so I can just trim it out. I want to get it pretty close, and then gonna just cover up the butt ends and start to form a collar. Because you'll see like a natural collar forming as we tie in these last couple materials. Flash is looking good. Let's trim it off. Looks real good. Looks nice. Really nice.
We owe everything to Flash.
Okay, maybe not everything, but again, it's going to be a good, attractive material to have. All right, so we've got the Flash locked into place. We've preened the tail material 3 or 4 times. So it's time to cut the gold biots. These are gold goose biots. So we're going to trim off 2 gold goose biots, and we're going to tie these in as sort of, again, they're like emerging legs, or they could be wing buds, more wing buds, you know. It's just another material to mimic a life cycle of an emerger. You know, everything's starting out, so you don't know what it is exactly that the fish is keying on. Does it look like part of the wing bud? A little bit there. And I'm locking it in the same way I did the tail. 2 or 3 loose wraps. You're able to adjust it. And we'll get the other one, and we're going to do the same thing here. Just get it lined up as best we can. And I'm going to do just a couple loose wraps. As I go, I can kind of fiddle with it. Like I said, it's a very delicate material, these goose biots. So take your time, be gentle with them, and you'd be surprised how much you can work with them, actually. So I'll just work this one into place a little bit more, adjust the angle and the length. Right there, looking much better, looking even. So we'll give it a pinch, lock it in with a few more wraps. That's good. They're pretty close right there in terms of angle and length. Sweep back these butt ends, and we'll trim out the goose biot there. You can see a little bit of the tag sticking up, so I'm going to try to sweep it back with the thread. Give the thread a few more wraps around the collar. And we're going to put on some more dubbing just to even out the body. The tail looks good. I'm preening it again, but that dubbing ball gives it nice separation. And they're pointing in the right direction. So what I want to do, like I said, a little bit more dubbing here on the collar. And it's really going to even out the shape of the body here. You're going to watch this taper just come nice and even after a few simple wraps with that dubbing. Very nice. So we're going to reach for our whip finish tool. Not that whip finish tool. This whip finish tool. So we'll get the whip finish tool out. We're going to do a 5-turn whip finish. Get that thread locked in nice and tight. Trim it off close as you can, and we'll get a little bit of an inspection, final looks. The biots are looking good. Again, it's difficult to work with them. Take your time and do the best you can to make them look even. But I've given you some tips that I think should help you.
He has shown us the way.
The way to tie size 16 and 14 Prince Barin Nymphs. Yes, the Prince Barin Nymph. It is my take on the classic Prince Nymph style. And I hope you guys enjoyed the tie. And until the next one, stay fly.